Welcome to Agency Acquisitions and Exits. I'm your host, Peter Lang. Today, we're joined by Link Moser, a web professional turned micro acquirer. Link has built a massively attractive lifestyle business through small micro acquisitions, showcasing how being a strategic buyer can create near passive income. During this episode, he shares his buy box, a specific type of motivated seller who is looking for a good home for their book of business. Many people bring up the challenges and fears they have around starting to do M&A. Listening to Link will resolve all of that. So let's dive in. Link, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll help the listener understand why they should be invested in this conversation. Give us the backstory. And make sure we understand how you got into web design, hosting, and all the things that we all can relate to because we come from this agency world.
Yeah, so I fell into this world very accidentally at a ripe old age of 20 years old. I think it was my dad who said, hey, why don't you build websites? Now, I didn't listen to a lot of things he said growing up, but this was one thing that I clearly listened to. I said, I don't know anything about websites, but I went to the bookstore, Amazon. This was 95, 96, so kind of the dawn of the internet. Bought myself a book, Teach Yourself HTML in 14 days, and I got 14 days. And I taught myself how to write websites. I pitched that one to a local real estate company, and I was off to the races. I was now a web developer. So that was my foray into this crazy world, and it has led to a lot of interesting things over the years.
We can date ourselves a bit. Did you have a preferred web counter?
I don't know which one I used, but I used a couple, and I remember the hot dog editor, and I'm guilty to say I used a little Microsoft front page as well.
Goodness.
Yeah, not real. I was never a super strong coder once things had to look better. So I quickly learned there were other people that I could hire that would be better at that stuff than me.
Well, okay, so you got into like what we call digital website development, website design, and in the time when it was productive to do so, the growing age of internet. Fast forward a bit, how did that business mature, not mature? You kind of told me in our prep call the story, but what would be a shortened version of what got you to the point of saying, I'm going to go acquire instead of organically run a business?
So I would say about 10, 15 years in, organic growth was slowing down, and it was never really stellar for me. I think looking back on that, I attribute that to being in a smaller, more rural market. So organic SEO wasn't bringing in the bigger clients that one might have had in a bigger, larger, more populated market. Perhaps some of that being a bit of an introvert or identifying with that. I was not going to cold call people, hey, you want one of these newfangled websites? So I was not growing at a rate I would have liked to. I think one of the big wake-ups for me was when a local competitor who had started around the same time, and they had scaled much bigger than me, but they were just 20 minutes away, and I was friendly with them. They ended up just closing shop one day, and next thing I knew, all their clients were with another competitor. And I thought, boy, they didn't reach out to me. They didn't say, hey, Link, this is happening in our world. Are you interested? They didn't know if I had two nickels to rub together. So I became more purposeful about, my analogy is you're never going to win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. So if I don't go and tell people that I am interested in buying their book of business, their company, or just a conversation, I just wanted a seat at the kitchen table. So I started sending letters out to people locally first, and then started expanding nationally, saying that very same thing. Hey, here I am. This is what I'm doing. If ever you are at a position where you're going to shift gears in life, I'd love a chat.
What was the trappings of that business? Because you listed as a competitor, the shingle changed, but the clients were all the same. Did that owner stick around? What else did you glean from that observational transaction?
I believe it was a husband and wife team, and I think that they may have had, and I believe also sort of unfortunate that one of them got in a pretty serious car accident. And so it was a combination of events, I think, in their personal world that caused them not to be able to keep that business going. And I'm still on friendly terms with I don't think they're married anymore, but the wife, and as this colleague in passing, because, we were 30 minutes away in the same area, and they'd built that up to, they had a physical office. They had, I think, 5 to 6, employees, where I was really always running more remote and more lean. Now, I don't know if they were profitable or not. I mean, just all that overhead doesn't make you necessarily a more profitable firm, but I didn't get the conversation, and I got the sense that they may have just given the clients off to this other firm, because it may have been kind of a, things are happening quick. We've got to find a good home for these clients. So I don't want to say it was a tragedy. Maybe for the business it was, and I think, both people found their place in the world after. But timing is a huge piece of these things, as I'm sure you know, as well as anyone else listening does. And you just want to have a chance to have that conversation, and it opened up another path of growth for me.
You highlighted a really important part, which is no one's going to bring you their business if they intend on winding it down, if they don't know you're willing to take it.
Correct.
And so you're proactive in letters, which is a great outreach campaign. We're sending personalized letters.
They were, I mean, technically it was a form letter, but I was still personalizing it. I was hand signing it. I was putting a real stamp on it. So, if I'd written it by hand, they wouldn't have been able to read it. But beyond that, yes, it was still a manual approach. And I always felt that you'd get better results with a physical letter than just an email that might get lost, may get caught in the shuffle. I wanted to look genuine and sincere. Here I am. I'm like you. I am in this space. This is what I do. And once LinkedIn became known, I would refer, hey, go look me up. My name is not hard to find on the internet. I'm a real guy. I'm a real deal doing this stuff. So, and again, I'm not asking for marriage here. I'm just asking for a conversation if and when it ever makes sense.
Let's help the listener give some parameters to this. So a distressed asset, people think, is an underperforming business. You described the human component, which are husband and wife, health, divorce, right? Situations cause people to wind down businesses or to move on and transition to other things. And there's value that's typically left when people do that. And so your approach was to say, okay, well, there's a category of businesses that are orphaning their clients, orphaning their value, instead of them just abandoning them to their own devices to find their own agencies or get their own support. Think of me if you're ever in that place. That's a really good strategy. Do you give yourself credit for it being a really good strategy, or what happened in your creation of this approach that most resonates?
It is timing. It is timing. Timing is a big piece of it, and you don't want to seem opportunistic, and you have to be mindful and respectful of, as you said, the human element here. But a lot of these people in those situations are thinking about their clients and the relationships that they have, and just want to see them taken care of. And I try to be very mindful of say, hey, what you have has value here, and let me present one opportunity or one option for you. I may or may not be the best fit. That's okay. You decide. But I am one path to help you move forward in finding a solution here. And you decide if this makes sense for you based on where you're at, and compare it with what other options you have. I never say that I am the one and only option. I am just a option. And we all know, I think sometimes if you make the path of resistance fairly easy, people will, okay, this sounds fair. This works for me. They don't necessarily need to go and have 20 other options to consider.
Before you did your first acquisition, which we can unpack a little bit of that, the motivations of the seller and kind of the deal, did you have the common objection or limiting self-beliefs that you couldn't go and acquire something because you didn't have capital resources, you didn't have a big team? How did you just get into it without the common things that everyone brings up as reasons for not doing it?
I'm a person who was guilty of imposter syndrome as much as the next person, even today, but I don't think I did at those times. I think I was quite confident that, in a way, it felt like winning the lottery, because when the timing was right, here's somebody that says, I've got 30 to 50 clients, and you're sitting there thinking, boy, I know how hard it is to just get one new client. So this is a good opportunity. And so I didn't ever think of any of these thinking, man, I can't do this. Maybe I was naive, and that's not to say there weren't mistakes made, but I don't remember feeling that. So I give myself a pat on the back for thinking, yeah, okay, here, I'm going for this. Let's get this sew them up before somebody changes their mind.
Yeah, or before they figure this out. Let's take as much opportunity as possible.
Time kills all deals.
Indeed. All right, so before that, let's get to that first acquisition. You running your own ship, right? So it's fairly entrepreneurial.
Yep.
You don't have this big agency or big team. You did outreach, email, letter to a seller. And that seller said, yes, I'll take that call or take that meeting. How'd that first interaction happen?
It was similar to that, but some of these people would send in these letters, hey, I got this letter from you a year ago. I'm pulling it out now because X is happening in my life. Now is the right time for them to reach out. I'd love to talk to you about it. So you'd get a phone call or an email. I'd get right back to them. I spent that time listening, understanding where they're at, then asking some questions, which I started to narrow down to a 2-page, because after a while you kind of had to vet them, like, tell me about your business. Is this something that I can take over? Will this fit in my world? Can I be you, I guess, in that regard, so that we're trying to minimize attrition and risk. And if the boxes are checked, then the question comes, what do I need to know in order to give you a number, or terms rather? And so that was another set of, I need this, this, and this. And after a while, I got pretty good about ferreting the stuff out. All right, I got enough to know. I'm going to come back to you. And many times in those early years, I would bring 3 scenarios back, and they were all a variation of a little cash down and an earnout. And if it was more cash down, it was a shorter earnout. So it was sort of levers you could pull. The longer you wait, the more you'll stand to get, the less I put down. So if you want more up front, it'll be less overall, but you'll get more up front. And I was happy with all 3 options. So, and that would then lead potentially to a yay or an nay.
So in that first one, what option did they choose?
So the very first one, around 2014, there was no cash down. I think it was a single option. That was a case where, fortunately, it was a husband and wife. And the husband, who had all the technical knowledge, unfortunately passed away. And so the wife is left with this asset and not the technical knowledge to manage it. And they had the letter sitting for a year. So I think it was just a straight earnout around 50% of the gross revenue for a 12-month period.
Think about how people would go, whoa, what? Link, zero out of pocket. You acquired this company. The technical person who supported those clients isn't there anymore. How did you wrap your head around getting a deal like this done?
This was a mom and pop operation. It was primarily hosting and web dev. So, and I think most of these sites were straight HTML. So they were pretty easy to migrate. Maybe 30, 40 clients. There's no brand value there. There's no IP. It's a book of business. And, this widow had to find a home for these, and she wanted to make sure they were taken care of. And I fit that bill, and I was happy to do that. I feel bad for her situation, and I tried to do everything I could to make that as smooth and simple. And she was able to collect value. It wasn't, in that case, I don't think, it certainly was not going to be a life-changing amount of money, as it is for many of these people. It's just, I'm done with this chapter in my life for whatever reason, whether life forced it or not, or I chose it. I have these clients, these relationships. I would rather not tell them, hey, go figure it out yourself. I would make that smooth and easy for them, so I get that off of my conscience, and then off we go. And yes, if I can capture some value for it, great. The second one that was in 2017 was a second career for a gentleman who had retired from a corporate job. I think as a quasi hobby, he started building some websites, as it many of us start that way, and people ask you, and so you boiled up a book. His wife was then retiring. He wanted to get this off of his plate, and he was local to me. We met up, passed the burger and a beer test. And, I said, hey, here's 3 scenarios. He picked the middle one. And there we go. And that was, again, another 30, 35 clients. Joomla-based clients, those were, which I was new to, but still cPanel hosting, and we made that work, and we could redesign them in WordPress down the road.
Did you expand your cost? So 2014, in 2017, and then you're getting clients, you're managing more. Did you stay the same size? Did you expand? What'd that look like?
Cost definitely did go up. I've always run with a remote team using primarily contractors. So that was a variable expense that would ebb and flow with the work. The hosting infrastructure and costs went up. The second acquisition was right on the heels of that one in 2017. This was about 100 clients. This was a spin out. Oh, this guy was not retiring. He was not leaving the industry. He was deciding to pursue a vertical and then had all the clients that didn't meet that vertical that he wanted to move along. So that was a spin out. That interesting snafu with that one was that he had his own custom proprietary CMS with no documentation. I didn't know how much of a headache that was going to be, but it did come with the servers. So we just took over the servers, which came with additional capacity, and ended up being my current hosting partner for the back end, which has been a great company. So you learn these little things as you go, and I eventually moved everything else into that world. So yes, it's definitely expanded, but certainly with that recurring revenue going up, you have the revenue to cover that for sure, and still have good margins.
You're acquiring these book of businesses, and there's faster growth than you ever experienced organically. What was keeping you from doubling and tripling and quadrupling down in it?
Finding enough of those opportunities that fit that buy box. As I did more of these, I learned where some of the darker sides were. I learned what attrition looked like. I learned what a mishandled handoff looked like. I learned that even though you were right in the terms of your legal agreement, you still had to do your side of the deal, even if the other guy didn't, and it would cost you money in legal fees to try to prove your point. And so, I had a seller disappear. I've been sworn at by one guy who I think had an addiction problem. So I learned it. So I became more cautious. And I think also, and this is the late 20 teens here, if you will, 18, 19, 20, we're leading up to the pandemic. Prices seem like they're accelerating in this space. I was learning where the dark side was. And so I was becoming a little more cautious and pushing a little harder, like we were going to have some better parameters around deal terms. So many sellers, as I went upstream, were becoming more sophisticated. My friend's a business broker and says that I could get, 6X for this. Okay, good luck. So the gap was getting bigger, what I was willing to do and from a risk standpoint and what I could find. And so that became very frustrating, but I don't know how I would have combat that other than I could have sweetened my side a little more on the multiple, but those terms were not really going to be very negotiable. No way was I going to stroke a check and shift all the risk onto me. So it just became harder to find opportunities. So I had a pretty long dry spell.
When you sit down with a seller and you explain a deal structure that is balancing the risk profile of the future expectations, what's their challenge in understanding it? What is it that you're typically telling them to help them understand your perspective or the most beneficial perspective?
What I learned from that was to drill in as early as you can on seller motivation, because this is a younger industry. This is not like I'm going after plumbers who they may be more traditionally retired age, gray-haired folks in that space. So again, starting in the mid-90s, there was a lot of people that were not traditional retirement age. So their motivation for reaching out was probably more financial. So I had to understand why somebody was reaching out and responding to my letter. If they were a traditional retirement age, there was a life circumstance, and I don't want to sound like we're preying on those situations, but they were a good reason for an exit. If it was just, hey, I'm happy what I'm doing, but if you offer a premium and an insane amount of money, I'll think about it, I would tell them I'm not your guy. So unpacking that was one of the things I learned to do pretty early on in those calls, because it helped save me time. And if the motivation made sense, if that box was checked with them, then I would talk about that risk of, okay, hey, look, I can't guarantee you a fixed amount of money, because on the inverse, you can't guarantee me that all these clients are going to stay. You don't know that any more than I do. And so we have to manage that risk collectively and do the best we can in a handoff that we will work together on that will be unique to you and me. But the financial side is with the earnout is we've got to align our interests. The more I retain, the more you get to keep too. So we both want that scenario. If I just handed over a check, your incentive would be a lot different than mine.
You talked about learning and getting your MBA in mergers and acquisitions from, you know, front lines experience. What's a meaningful challenge, mistake? What's something that you're like, oh, that was the biggest lesson that I can apply moving forward? And the listeners who are trying to do this themselves and going by, they really need to know this. And hopefully they don't have to reinvent the mistake that I did.
So I hear two questions in there. And I don't think of it as mistakes as much as a failing forward and growing moment. So I've got two answers for that question because I think you may have two questions in there. One being that gentleman that I did buy a business from that did disappear on me, the only time I ever spent money on legal counsel, like, hey, do I have to uphold my end? Yeah, apparently you do. I learned after that I needed to really put some teeth in, and I think they call clawbacks in this, so that if, up to that point, I thought people were pretty motivated by money, but evidently not. Everyone is. So I needed to make sure that I had it pretty well stacked in my favor. Hey, look, seller, if you don't do A, B, C, and D, this is what will happen. And they could sit there pre-signing and think, I'll never do that. Well, great. I hope you don't. But if you do, this is what's going to happen. So that was a learning moment there. Now, the other experience that I think people should be aware of, especially if you're on the buy side, was during COVID. Not that there's any relevancy to that, but I took over a company. So I'm here in New England. This company was in Denver. This was the only one I ever took over that actually came with employees, and I did not merge it or rule it in. I kept the brand and everything in place, and they did social media content creation, organic social media content creation. But I took it with a straight earnout, and it had already been cratering, but it was 100% recurring revenue. And I thought, well, with a straight earnout, I don't have much to lose here. That business was done in 5 months. It had a low number of clients, high dollar amount, relatively speaking. These are multiple $1,000 retainers, not your hosting play at $30 to $50 a month. And we didn't change anything in the pricing of the process, but those clients were already naturally attritioning, didn't have a lead gen. It was tied to the owner's brand. And I did not lose financially on that, but I am confident that a Main Street business broker, no offense to those that are, but somebody didn't know the risk here, would have packaged that up, and some poor person might have, leveraged their 401k or gone out and got an SBA loan on something like this and really found themselves in a really devastating spot. So my takeaway from that was this stuff does happen. This can happen. This is a risk. And I share that story every opportunity I get because maybe it was me, maybe somebody else would have done something differently, but 5 months is not a long time when you're keeping the same client-facing people and the same brand and all those components. So it does happen. So I've learned that the terms need to be where your risk tolerance is.
Your risk tolerance and your awareness that people can disappear,
Mm-hmm.
That a business can completely underperform to expectations, and be able to do that in a way that doesn't seem like you're just a big bad buyer taking advantage of them.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, there's a secret about Link that you haven't shared yet, though.
What's that secret, Peter?
Most people think it takes, another full-time job to do M&A and to run a business and to do deals, but that's not the case with you, Link. So maybe give us an idea of what does, not a day in the life, but what is it philosophically that drives your day and how you allocate time and prioritize it? Because if that was the case, you'd maybe build something differently than what you built today.
Good. Thanks for that reminder. So it does feel like sometimes it can be a bit of a part-time job. And I use a very, very poor analogy in my mind of this like a snake eating something where that bulge is going through. And you've got to have bandwidth if you're going to manage this yourself. So I got a little aggressive in 17 and 18 when I thought this was like shooting fish in a barrel. I was just stacking acquisition up after acquisition. And it was like, I have found the promised land. But you don't always see where things go south right away. So you need a little runway there to focus on that post-acquisition, but also to get it to sort of acclimate in. And then leading up to one, you need time to source these deals, get on these conversations, and, kiss a lot of frogs that don't turn into princes or princesses. And that is emotionally deflating at times, and you need to keep an eye on your business as well. So I would not be sending letters out consistently. I would send them out in spurts when I knew I had some bandwidth and both time and financial capacity to take on an acquisition. I would then back off when I was digesting one of these, because I wanted to have my full attention on this, and I want that seller to not think that this guy's not returning my calls. He seems like he's scattered. You don't want to give that impression that you're all over the place. So it was very much a just ebb and flow. Okay, hey, we're doing this deal. I'm loving this. This is my primary focus right now. Rest of the business is either managed by somebody else or I've got enough of an eye on it. But you, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, you're my priority now. Let's get this over the finish line. And if you're doing an earnout, that seller certainly wants to see you continue to be present and visible through the integration, because they have a lot of money on the line there. I've never had a case where somebody's really gotten, angry at me over that, thank goodness. But I could see it happening. Like, hey, Link, you agreed to do this, and now you're chasing this, or you're on vacation somewhere. I mean, you really need to be mindful of that process, of that ebb and flow. And then 6 months, 9 months, a good year, things sort of have settled in, and you know where the landscape is, whatever that timeline is. You can go look for another. This is in the vein of doing this all by yourself.
Yeah, it'd be really helpful if someone had you around if they didn't want to ebb and flow, right?
It would.
So did you ever think of, well, let's go into some of the things that we discussed. Did you think about partnering or expanding the things you could do by, extending beyond your own investment means, your own company objective? You're a lone wolf, like.
It is the limitation. I think we have the ability to do what we do well and things we don't do well. And I have definitely come to appreciate that sometimes 1 + 1 can be 3. So yeah, I have found at this point in life, I would love to help others with an M&A journey. Specifically that could be doing this kind of work for someone else that, maybe doesn't have the interest or the bandwidth, a bigger shop that says, boy, we'd love to focus on this, but that's not my cup of tea, or I'd like some help with it or some additional bandwidth. I think that would be really exciting work to do. I'm not thinking I need to have my hands in the cookie jar or the equity or anything of that nature. Just figure some way to do that at arm's length. As for myself, I think, what has held me from taking it further is that the finance side, the money side, as the deal sizes potentially get bigger, there's some more moving parts and there's a lot more risk from a financial standpoint. And having been more in the shoes of the operator role, I love talking to potential sellers. I love negotiating that piece, but I can see a place pretty quickly where, great, I've got this great conversation with a seller. He's got a business that might be doing $1.5 million, 2, 3 million top line. He's taking home 300 to 500. He's 75 years old, and I'm describing one that I know of. What do I do with this thing? It's not local to me. I don't necessarily want to be in the operator's chair. I don't know that I want to put my house up, but man, I've got 2 or 3 of these things. What do I do with these, right? If I had a line of credit, I would say, great, I could just bring these together, package them up, create some efficiencies. Somebody else might want to do that instead. And, I guess being part of that somehow would be an exciting conversation. I just don't know. There's a missing who there for me.
Now, you've been buying, so you've been acquiring. Would you sell it?
I can't sell what I have right now because I think I've got to keep the lights on. Someday it would behoove me to figure out how to grow it more and then perhaps to extract myself from the day-to-day, which I think would make it an even more attractive business for some acquirer down the road. So yeah, there's a day in the road where I'm not emotionally attached to it, but I think I would need to add more value to it and have a plan for what I'm going to do with those proceeds. I'm not got a point where I can, retire. 5 little kids and some of them might want to seek higher education and at some point. So I got some runway.
So how many acquisitions to date? Just so we get the total.
I think 7 or 8.
So you have more acquisitions than kids.
Yes.
You
I'm
almost
gonna
have
keep it that way too.
one for each of you. You had mentioned, maybe continuing to grow it, but also, you've got a safety net, right? You got something in place. It doesn't require that much of a lift, as I understand it, where you could apply energy in other areas. What do you think now that you're M&A savvy? You've done one thing that the vast majority of people who want to do acquisitions don't even attempt to do, which is the first one. And then you replicated that outcome. You've learned the trial and error. All of the deals have shaken through, right? You don't have that many earnouts left. You don't have that much in progress. So you're at a state where you can either leap off that platform and take on something new or continue to do what you're doing now. Where do you think you're headed?
Peter, I'd love to use this as a platform to explore something different. I think part of why maybe the path I've not chased is because it's become familiar. That's a crummy answer. I get it, but not everything is motivation is dollars and cents. And we talked a little about this in the pre-call is the loneliness of being that lone wolf. I think innately I'm a giver and a bit of a people pleaser. So the opportunity to help someone else achieve a goal would give me personal meaning as well. And I think it would be a bit of a spin on the challenge. And if it was perhaps with a larger shop, that I can see what some of that other integration looks like when you are getting employees and staff and resources and a brand. Some of that post-acquisition stuff of working through all that and bringing in efficiencies, that stuff I think is equally intriguing as well. Now, whether someone needs that or not, they may have their own processes, fine. But all aspects of that M&A is quite intriguing, and it's diverse enough that I find it challenging. Going and spending time on site with a new acquisition, many of the ones I did were all virtual, and you were just pretty much getting a client list. Yes, you get to meet some of the clients, and for some of these I'd go out. The client base was, in Western New York. I'd go out and spend some time meeting people, and that was neat. But I think I'm ready to be a little more behind the scenes than be completely client facing. And, I think it would invite diversity and it would challenge me and give me some more personal fulfillment, which at this point is equally as important as the financial upside. I think that's my honest answer there.
Well, it's a good place to get. Like a lot of the accidental agency owner is a common storyline that people have.
Mm-hmm.
You're the accidental M&A professional. You didn't set out to go learn how to do corporate business development, M&A, from the traditional academic sense. You built a competency of a skill set by doing it. Maybe I'm correctly or miscorrectly labeling this. Found it more seductive and appealing than the agency side of the business.
100%. I tell people I suck at organic growth. This M&A was a bit of an accidental lever, but my gosh, all right, well, I have a little more traction here. This works a little better for me, and the high that comes from putting a deal together is a lot more exciting than just landing another web project.
So,
yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And even if the dollar numbers are fairly small, it's still a bit of a rush to pull that together. And especially when that other person is feeling good about it, you're feeling good about it. And I look at myself as helping them move forward in their goals. I'm getting an influx of cash flow and everybody wins.
Yeah. It's you go from being
right.
Even when you do it wrong, that you still get that short-term endorphin hit.
Yeah.
You went through the normal journey that I see a lot of agency owners or practitioners and service go through. You went and did a service for the market. You sold people on it. So you persuaded them to buy the thing, a promise you could make. You started building a business. And then you didn't take that next step, which was, okay, now I'm going to be an organizational leader, right? You stayed within a area of wheelhouse, which is I'm going to stay small, I'm going to stay lean, I'm going to stay agile. And then you found a way to grow geometrically without expanding dramatically the complexity, which isn't always the case. More can often create a lot of obligations, a lot of bloated infrastructure. You did in a very light lift manner. And so you've unlocked something that is very much available to a lot of businesses in a lot of industries. It's just no one teaches you this. Even in like the more academic, entrepreneurship through acquisition category, you're growing your book of business by acquiring books of businesses. And if you were to go back to your younger self when you just started investing time and energy, what advice would you give yourself about this strategy?
I would have told myself to plant those seeds earlier. I mean, it really is like gardening. And I'm amazed at how many people reach out to a letter, or I would send letters. And then if I had an email address, I would follow up with an email address. And people would hang on to these things. They'd file it away. And I got one a few weeks ago that was, I think, 3 years old. I don't always remember the context of the conversation unless there's a chain there that I can remember. But people hang on to these. So I think would have told my younger self, before learning about that first local customer, as soon as I saw this industry growing and I saw the potential, I would have also told myself you need to really hit the organic growth because you had a blue ocean at that point and you need to charge more. We'd make that mistake when we're new. But I would have definitely had M&A on my mind at any growth stage, as I think most companies should, because you can always say no to an opportunity, but you don't get to say yes to a great opportunity if you aren't making yourself known. And it's not a bad situation to be in when people are coming to you saying, hey, I am looking at exiting what I'm doing. I thought of you because you reached out X months, years ago, and you're my first call. Would you like to have a conversation? Those are big conversations potentially to have. And when things fit together, it's good. And so I think any owner should have that somewhere on their radar and not think that's something to do later. That's something for the big guys, because I've done several here that had no cash down, zero risk to me, that have worked out.
And although that sounds elusive and like a once in a lifetime opportunity, they actually come around quite frequently, don't they? Like,
they do. They're definitely, it's under the radar. It's not without work. And there's cost in that outreach, both financial and time. It's not like I'm going on, biz buy sell and finding these, because I didn't. Very often once they're brokered, a lot of that conversation disappears.
I tell people once it's brokered, it's broken.
Well, there's another person at the table who is going to control the narrative. And I couldn't have the same level of conversations with people that if there was an intermediary. Part of that is early on is the rapport building, the trust that comes with it, that, hey, I'm a good fit for you if and when this happens. And I need to be able to tell that story directly.
We had discussed it being it's a programmatic strategy. You're actually running a playbook, but that didn't resonate with you as much because you were just executing consistent behavior to get a consistent outcome, but you are running a playbook. So if you were to give us a retrospective of that playbook, from sourcing to closing to buying the business and transitioning it, what are the steps that you think you've executed repeatedly every time? Maybe not the ones you've learned from, but where you're at now. Walk us through all those steps. How do you get there?
You want me to run right through the steps of
all the way from how you do it?
So I've hired a VA over the years to help me source the list. You got to have your contact, who you're reaching out to. You got to have first name, last name. This is not something you're going to put dear owner on. You need the company name and you need a mailing address at a minimum. The email address would be great, but where my initial outreach is direct mail, I need that basic. And I would use, for most of it, I use the same VA, but it's not too hard to train somebody. I would ask for some samples. I would then go look at the websites and I say, yep, this is on target. This is what I'm looking for. No, it's too big. It's too small. You look at the About Us section, and if they've got 25 faces there and you're looking for small mom and pop, that's not your target. If they're doing video and commercial and broadcast work and you want social media, that's not your target. So you need to get that list. There's some directories out there where you can hire someone to scrape it. You can find the local library has some business directories. Reference USA, the data quality is a little mixed, but it's there. However you got to get there, you got to figure that out. You got to have a little confidence that your list isn't crap. Once you check that box, which is a big box to check, then I've got a tried and true letter that I used for much of the years, and it hasn't changed much. It's one piece. It's one thing that I'm not handing out, so don't ask. You could write your own in your own voice, but
If you want it, you gotta work with Link to get it.
here's who I am. Here's why you should listen to me. Here's what I'm looking for. It's pretty direct. And here's how you can validate me, i.e. go look me up on LinkedIn, on company letterhead. So, hey, I'm in this world. This is not a scam. Look me up, do what you need to, reach out when you're ready, kind of thing. Out that goes. Up until this last mailing, I was doing them all by hand with a junky inkjet printer, but I found a mail shop online that my concern was if I went bulk, it would look too bulk, but this one, they used some of the handwriting. It was pretty good. It was good. And I'm sending this out to advertising agencies. So to have them comment on it and say, hey, this was pretty good, made me think it worked. And it saved me a ton of time. And then you sit back and you wait for the phone to ring. And the emails will come in and the phone rings if you did it right. And you'll have those conversations. And depending how eager you'll vet those. You'll get an NDA out. I can't tell you how many NDAs I send out. And I'll ask for basic information. I'd love to see some P&Ls, but I'm mindful of people sending that kind of stuff out to strangers, although you'd be surprised how many people open up their books to a guy they just barely know. There's a lot of trust there, and I respect that and take that seriously. And then you decide, am I going to make an offer here? Am I going to run some numbers? Do I then want to go and meet this person in person? If it's around the corner, I sure would. If it really fits my buy box, I'll get on a plane. Last year I went out to Boise, Idaho, where I'd never been, to meet a guy. And that deal didn't end up working, but it was nice to make the connection and go to a new place. But I want to make that personal connection as much as I can before I start throwing numbers out, because my feeling is that the tighter we are, the more you're, liking me here, that will only help if I, lay out terms that weren't quite what you had in mind. If we can get close, we can work through that. Lay out the terms. That's your next big aha moment. And if there's a connection there, then now you're just going to write this thing up as, quickly as you can before they change their mind and work on your timeline for how you're going to integrate this. And that's going to depend on the scenario and what moving parts you have, and then execute on it.
Perfect. Did you rely on any accounting partners, lawyers? How much of this is your own time? Just give us the parameters there.
I have not, because I'm a frugal Yankee. But these are small deals where it was a little bit of my own capital and a seller earnout, so there wasn't a bank involved for for all of them. Certainly, had there been more money in a bank and if there were investors, then yes, we would need to invest more in professional due diligence. I was dealing with smaller sized businesses where I think a 4 to 8 page purchase and sales agreement, with a 4-page LOI, I almost think may have helped, because it was not a ton of legal mumbo jumbo that was going to scare somebody off. And the moment I felt like I needed to lawyer up, they might feel like they needed to. Some of them I think did, hey, I'm going to have my lawyer look at this. Great. Well, that's your prerogative, but I don't mean to say this wrong, but some lawyers try to kill deals. And, if they want to mark up, it's not going to be my best interest. So have them look at it, whatever you want, but this stuff is here for a reason, and I'm pretty firm on it. So I think plain simple language hasn't served me wrong, and I would learn from things where, all right, the next time we're going to add this in. So maybe having hired and paid for due diligence early on might have saved some of that. I don't know. But again, smaller size deals, I was comfortable with it. Would I recommend that to all? No, of course not. And I'm pretty good with the numbers. And with an earnout, you aren't as worried about those numbers not being completely actual. You almost kind of know they're not going to hold water completely, and you're going to expect some attrition. Tax returns and all that stuff, it'll come out in the wash.
Yeah.
In an earnout.
You protected yourself from downside risk through the deal structure you put in place.
Yes.
Most of the investment and everything leading up to a deal, whether that be lawyers or quality of earnings, really in-depth due diligence, is to mitigate the risk of uncertainty when you're allocating a significant amount of capital or putting an investment at risk and justifying the investment. But when both seller and buyer come together to align on a deal structure that incentivizes both on the future performance, then you don't have that same level of requirement.
Correct.
which allows you to move more efficiently, quicker, less expense.
Correct.
How long does it, how long is the fastest, like how longest deals you've done?
These all happened pretty quick because of the reasons you just outlined. You didn't have to wait on other parties and a lot going on. And I found sellers are pretty motivated. When they're ready to do that, it's ready to go. So you could be 30, 45 days here. The lengthy part was for them to get organized around their contacts, get in those client lists. I would give them like a Google sheet, like here are the fields I need. So depending on how organized they were, that might take them time to create that, surprisingly, or not so surprisingly. And then you'd have to think about your transition period. You know, was there a reason if there's a sense of urgency for some of these people, it's gonna like, hey, I'm gonna, something's gonna happen here, or my hosting renewal is at this point, and I really resigned to not repay it. How fast can you move this? So sometimes there's other circumstances on their side of the table that, like, they waited too long to reach out, and now you're chasing it, and you just got to kind of drop everything and move quickly if it makes sense for you without rushing it, which, is that balance.
I heard you say you would recommend the listener to start thinking acquisitions earlier. You also said potentially do more of them. What else do you want the listener to get as advice, or your younger self, from this session?
I think my younger self and the listener, there's almost fear, I suppose, and trepidation around trying anything new. And this seems like, man, geez, like you're telling me to go out and get a bunch of people's unknown accounts with histories I don't know. Isn't that a mixed grab bag? You don't know what you're going to get. Whereas if I'm onboarding them organically, I'm training them from the start. If you're knocking organic out of the park and you got more work you can handle, then maybe this isn't a play for you. Although I still think there's value here from a growth standpoint, but it depends on what your exit is. But to tell my younger self to try this earlier, perhaps get more reps in early on. Certainly the younger I was, the more runway I would have had. Now, I may not have had as much capital to work with, but I don't know, maybe you go out and you raise capital. Maybe you go swinging a little harder. That's some of the stuff I think I would tell my younger self is take calculated risks and invest in that. And like any practice skill, the more reps you have, the more swings of bat, I don't want to say better you get at this, but the more adept you may become and the more comfortable you are. And I thought I needed to get some reps in with my own money before I'd have any track record to ask an investor or a stranger, hey, invest in me. Well, I've done this 6 to 8 times. I've used my own money. Here's the track record. Here's my ROI. Now I'm looking for your help to take this up to a next level. If that was the path I was going, I felt like that would be a more respected conversation than to say, hey, I'm not going to use my money. I want yours. That's who I am. And I just thought maybe somebody would respect that and see value in it if and when I ever needed to do that. So I wanted to learn a little on my own. And, I think it's good to make smaller bets and make them quicker and learn. And then it's sitting there agonizing over one big one, depending on your personal comfort, and see how you may do one. You're like, screw that. I'm not doing that again. You may say that. You may not feel the same rush that Peter and I can relate to on this stuff, but it's, they say business is a contact sport. So, jump in the pool, get your feet wet, get your hands dirty. And M&A is no different, but I guess it all circles back to where you want to go, right? If you want to build this something up, roll it up and exit it, this is a faster path to do it than organic.
One of the best and most predictable paths to do it. Link, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, sharing your experiences. If someone wants to reach out and get your advice or potentially even collaborate with you on doing deals and doing M&A, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn, very easy to find with my name. Email works fine as well, link@windhill.com. Again, with my name, I don't think there's a ton of us on the internet, so I'm not a hard guy to find, and I welcome the chance to talk with anyone, offer any advice I can. I'll certainly enjoy this stuff very much.
Wonderful. I appreciate you, Link. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Link, for sharing your story and insights with us. Your journey proves that small micro acquisitions can lead to significant changes in growth while maintaining a certain balance that most people know is the primary goal for owners. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on Spotify or YouTube for more stories like this. If you or someone you know has an acquisition or exit story to share, reach out. We'd love to hear it. As always, thank you for tuning in. Stay safe. See you next time.